This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
Good evening and welcome to tonight's Late Late Show. My name is Kathryn Taylor. Tonight my special guest is Claire Harley. Claire is an EdD student, history teacher, assistant principal for curriculum, and she is passionate about research-informed practice. She works very hard to implement this in her school and in her practice, and she's also researching teachers' experiences of it.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
Good evening and welcome to the Late Late Show, everyone. I'm Kathryn and I'm speaking to you live from Buckinghamshire in the UK. On today's show, my special guest is Claire Harley, and as I mentioned in the intro, she is an EdD student, history teacher, assistant principal for curriculum, and she is passionate about research-informed practice. She works in her role at school and as a research student into looking at the benefits of research-informed practice and teachers' experiences of implementing it and engaging with it in their professional lives. We're going to be discussing Claire's story and her reflections during tonight's show. Remember, if you are listening in live and would like to join us, either to post questions or into the chat on the Podbean app, or to ask questions that we can answer directly, please do download the Podbean app and visit ttradio.org and click listen live on the homepage. This will take you directly to the show, and there you can post your comments and ask your questions during our conversation, or call in if you want to. And of course, this is available to download from wherever you get your podcasts later on during the week. Please, if you do call in, you need just to press the icon at the top of the screen on your phone's app, and we'll be able to connect you. But while we get going, I would like to bring Claire into the studio. Claire, can you hear me?
Hi, I can. Hello, thank you so much for having me.
You are very welcome. It's a real delight to have you on. I think we've got a lot of shared interests, Claire, and we've been corresponding for some time on X, haven't we?
Yeah, we have, fellow nerds, so it's good to talk.
It definitely. There's a Venn diagram, isn't there, with the old nerdiness of the researching the researchers. Is very meta. But welcome, Claire, and I wonder if you could just begin by setting the scene for us, giving us a bit of a background of how you got into teaching, and from that, where you are now with your research interests. How long have you been teaching?
So this is my 12th year of teaching. I met with some of our ITT students this morning, and to see all these new, very excited early career teacher faces definitely made me feel all of those 12 years today. So this is my 12th year. I'm currently an assistant principal, as you said in your introduction, and I swore I would never be a teacher. Both of my parents were teachers and worked in education, and so I swore I was never going to do it, and then ended up being a cover supervisor to fund my time at university. And as soon as I walked in a classroom, I just knew it was for me, basically. And so after years of fighting it, I did my initial teacher training and just never looked back.
No, it's interesting, actually. I wonder, certainly when I decided to train as a teacher, my parents, who are also both teachers, had some reservations, but it does get you, doesn't it? It's there's no, because I worked in other industries before I trained as a teacher, and it's certainly a very different way of life. But I wouldn't give it up and wouldn't change. Well, I would change lots about it, actually, but I wouldn't change. Working with the kids. That's the best bit. I feel. I don't know about you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, don't get me wrong. I enjoyed school and always tried hard. But it wasn't until I walked into a classroom that I felt that ambition and that fire in my belly, like that wanting to to make something better, and nothing was too good for my pupils. And so, haven't looked back since. So there we go. And then, did you ask me about how I got to my research?
Yeah, so I mean, I know that you've studied history and you've taught history and all the rest of it, and we all love our subjects and all those sort of great things. But I wonder, and I know from my experience, certainly we come to our research because there is something that we notice that is not quite right, or something that we want to really understand better. And I wonder if you can talk us through how you got to that point of actually making that decision to go back into a university and to actually start to problem solve the sector that we work in.
Yeah, absolutely. So I came into it quite early on. So as an NQT, so an old money early career teacher, I was put onto a programme at what used to be the National College in Nottingham by my brilliant deputy head and my mentor, who was assistant principal at the time. And it was an action research programme designed specifically for recently qualified teachers, and they taught us about like the reflective cycle of action research and the processes, and we had a project that we looked at with one of our classes, and at the end of this year-long cycle of action research, we presented to a regional audience of all the things that we'd done. And I don't think it's over-exaggerating to say that it was a really life-changing experience for me. It was the first time I felt like an expert in anything as a young teacher, and it was such an empowering experience that I fell in love with this idea of educational research being part of my practice really very early on. So as soon as I could, and I'd saved up enough money, I did my MA in educational research at Nottingham. And I kind of thought that would be the end of it. Like, I'd spent enough money on university and I'd get my answers. But you know what it's like when you do any kind of further educational study. You end up with more questions than you started with.
This is it. I think I saw it's probably a meme that goes around and does the rounds, but there's something about, when you do your undergraduate, you think you know everything, and actually your master's is the point where you realise just how little you know.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Then you have to build back up to go, I better find something out then.
Yeah, and so when I did my master's, I started having a look at this idea of teachers doing practice-based inquiry, and so I looked into it a little bit, but I wasn't really satisfied by it. And so as soon as I realised that, because at the time there weren't doctoral loans, and now as soon as I found out about them, I signed up. And if I'm really quite honest, I was probably pretty naive when I started looking at this this field that I'm looking at, which is how teachers engage with educational research, because it had been such a positive experience for me so far, right? So it must be the same for everybody, as we kind of like always start our framing when we're kind of new researchers. But actually the more I read into like context and what's going on, the more I started to realize that actually this is a really nuanced area, and there are positive and negative experiences for different people. And so I think as I've kind of grown as an EdD student, it's my understanding of whether research engagement is a good thing or not is much blurrier, but I think probably more realistic.
Excuse me. Yeah. So, I mean, as I sort of, from my experience and from what you're describing, you do start to get a real picture for the huge variation of experiences. And I mean, I could get very boring very quickly about phenomenology, but I won't. But I think you're doing that kind of you're looking at what is it like to be a teacher who has engaged in some form in educational research. Now, would that include teachers who do practice-based research within their context, or is it broadened out to anyone who's sort of done an EdD or masters, or is it to include people who have had some kind of consultant come to the school and tell them about some research, or they've been given a book to read, or how broad is your net?
So I think that's a really interesting question, and I suppose the answer is really that we don't know. So one of the things that I'm looking at in my research is the idea that so as you said, I'm doing a phenomenographical study where I'm trying to figure out what we mean when we say engagement with educational research, because I could be saying one thing, we could be nodding and chatting along for ages and having a conversation about something, or even worse, creating a policy and going on the assumption that you and I have an understanding that's the same about what we mean by educational research, and we don't. And so that for me is really problematic. And so sometimes when I'm talking to my friends who are teachers and they kind of go, oh yeah, you and your research stuff, that's really nerdy. When I actually ask them, so what do you think I do? They're not really sure. And then I don't think we have a very clear understanding of what we mean by research engaged. There's different levels, and to a certain extent we've jumped the gun, because there is research that's been created by really, really interesting academics like Tim Kaine, for example, who talk about the benefits of being involved with different forms of research. But we haven't asked teachers as the profession, we haven't said what we think yet, and that's where I think we have a gap, and that's where my research hopefully comes in.
Now that is, I mean, I find that really fascinating. I did a phenomenographic analysis for mine, and it's so interesting, and you kind of start to pick at the thread, and then before you know where you are, you've got 35 meanings of the word congeniality. So when as you've started to talk to teachers in your own context, as you've been preparing to start your research, what sort of things are people saying?
So broadly, I think that what we can start to do is unpick what we mean by research informed by putting actions into 3 categories. And it might be that you do some more than others, or you just do one type, or it might be a situational thing. So I think that really there are 3 levels to what we could call research engagement. The first is technical, which is there is a policy that is implemented by a school or a trust, and teachers enact that policy that is based on evidence. So, for example, if a school has a silent do now, where we do 10 retrieval questions based on the concept of retrieval practice, and our job is to come up with the questions based on our last unit of work or whatever it might be, and we do the thing. So there's that technical approach. Then there's a more like practical. So this is what I find really interesting. And it's the idea that maybe we give teachers a toolkit of things that we think would be useful or beneficial in a classroom, kind of thinking around like the idea of maybe principles of instruction, that kind of notion, where I'm given the concepts and I'm given the ideas, and then as a teacher, I am the person who selects what I do when. And then the final one, which I think you see, and this might be something that you associate with, it's definitely something that's for me, is this idea of emancipatory action, any kind of research engagement. So where the teacher as an individual is actively involved in the knowledge generation process. So not just reading it and then doing it, but being the person who writes what's going on and what we know about what's working in the classroom. So I think roughly we fit into every kind of research engagement kind of fits into one of those 3 categories. And you can chop and change between most of them. So obviously my Ed D would be the 3rd emancipatory category, but on a day-to-day basis, when I'm teaching history, it's practical, and we all follow with it when we work in an organization. So some stuff I do because that's the thing that we do here. So they're all for everybody, and I wouldn't say that I think one is necessarily better than the other. I just think it's really interesting to see what each of those 3 look like.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. Thank you. And as we sort of start to scratch the surface, I mean, I don't suppose you've had much time to really do much analysis yet, but what's your kind of, do you have I don't want to say hypothesis particularly, because that makes us sound like we're sort of positivists, which we probably aren't. But what's your gut feeling? Do you think that teachers are likely to have a better relationship with any particular level of your sort of framework there?
I'm not sure, and I couldn't speculate. So, so my plan is, I've got a maternity leave coming up in January.
Oh, congratulations!
Thank you. So, my plan is essentially to generate as much data as I can in the next few months, and then my main analysis stage will be February, March onwards. Hope depending on how things go.
Yeah,
so
of course,
I couldn't say, but the one thing that I could say for now is that. The thing that will come out of my research is that the definitions created will be by teachers for teachers.
Yes.
So I couldn't say what they are yet, but I think that what we find out will be pretty exciting.
No, it sounds brilliant. I'm really looking forward to sort of seeing this work progress, and thank you so much for just walking us through it. Now, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to play our messages and the news. I'm going to mute us both while I do so, and then when we come back, we're going to dig a bit deeper into some of these sort of ideas that we've started to engage with. Is that all right, Claire?
Sounds great.
Perfect. I'll speak to you shortly.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Introducing Reading Solutions UK. Home to Dreambox Reading Plus, the online reading development programme, improving outcomes for students and schools nationwide. Create stronger readers in your school from Key Stage 2 to beyond GCSE, using Reading Plus's evidence-based adaptive technology. Reading Plus accurately assesses your students' skills gaps and places them on a personalised learning pathway, built to accelerate their strengths and improve on their areas for development. You can try the programme with a free 4-week pilot today. Search Reading Solutions UK to find their website and request your free pilot today.
How can you show your students the opportunities that await them? How can you fuel their aspirations and motivate them to achieve? Futurum Careers provides a wealth of stimulating resources aimed at encouraging 14 to 19-year-olds to pursue careers in STEM and SHAPE. We help you to show your students what they can aim for and how. From articles to activity sheets, animations to podcasts, all our resources align with Gatsby benchmarks and are free for you and your students to download. Visit futurumcareers.com and subscribe today. Futurum Careers, helping teachers to inspire the next generation.
Get set for the year ahead with the Bloomsbury Education Back to School sale. Save 30% on all Bloomsbury education books until 30th September. From the very best in research-led practice to trusted advice on inclusivity, behaviour and curriculum design, we've got something for everyone. Visit bloomsbury.com/B2S sale to shop now and save 30%. Bloomsbury Education, books for every step of your teaching journey.
Teachers, mark your calendars for BetUK 2025, the world's biggest EdTech event. Join over 30,000 educators at the Excel London from the 22nd to the 24th of January. Discover the latest EdTech innovations, network with peers and access hundreds of hours of CPD. Did we mention it's 100% free for educators? Whether you're looking for inspiration or practical tools to enhance your teaching, BET has it all. Don't miss this opportunity to shape the future of education. Register today at uk.betshow.com. That's uk.betshow.com.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
The BBC reports that the Scottish Government has been defeated in a vote calling on ministers to expand free school meals to all primary school pupils. Education Secretary Jenny Gilruth said the government was committed to the universal rollout of the free meals, but that funding was not available due to financial pressures. The Scottish Government said the expansion would be limited to P6 and P7 pupils in receipt of the Scottish Child Payment, after First Minister John Swinney confirmed £500 million worth of cuts. The government cited prolonged Westminster austerity and record inflation as the main reasons for the funding gap. Scottish Conservative education spokesperson Liam Kerr submitted a motion calling on the government to give the meals to all primary pupils this parliamentary session, as promised, and said the SNP had shamefully betrayed Scotland's poorest pupils. The non-binding motion passed by 64 votes to 2. 60 abstentions were recorded. Children's Commissioner Nicola Killian said the rollback on universal free school meals was a broken promise to children, and that the move would exacerbate stigma and shame around free school meals. Schools Week covers the Education and Skills Funding Agency, which will be integrated into the core Department for Education by March next year. The move will happen over 2 stages and give schools a single point of contact for financial management and support. The ESFA is currently an executive agency of the Department for Education. Schools' financial support and oversight function will transfer from October the 1st and be brought together with the Regions Group, 9 areas overseen by regional directors. This will support the launch of regional improvement teams by January. Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson said this will provide a single seamless voice to schools and ensure that financial improvement is central to school improvement. Funding and assurance functions will be centralised on March 31st next year, when the ESFA will close. Set up in 2017, the agency is responsible for delivering and assuring £75 billion worth of funding for 25,000 educational settings. But the ESFA is the second education-related quango to be axed under the new government. The Institute of Apprenticeships and Technical Education is expected to close by April. ASCL have welcomed the changes if it produces a more efficient and joined-up approach to the oversight of school and college funding, but also said it would not solve the overriding problem that the current level of school and college funding is totally inadequate. The TES says that there are serious dangers in assuming schools are back to normal post-COVID. This is according to a report commissioned by Head Teachers and Leaders Union ASCL. Tim Oates, Group Director of Assessment Research and Development at Cambridge University Press and Assessment, writes in the report that schools are still dealing with challenges. The report warns that schools will continue to see challenges unfold for the next 5 to 10 years, as children whose development was impacted by the pandemic move through the system. The paper comes as 5 children's rights organisations has called on the government to remove the long shadow of the pandemic from children's lives. The report says the range of problems include increasing absence, widened attainment gaps, impacted reading and maths progress for certain groups, and worsening mental health and social and emotional skills. It also warns of research showing that children who were born or were very young during the pandemic face diminished social, cognitive and language development. Mr. Oates says the government must urgently work to remedy these problems rather than accepting them. A Department for Education spokesperson said it is determined to improve the life chances of all children. Finally, in the USA, KSBY News reports that California proposes a ban on large loads of homework in public schools. Assembly member Pilar Schiavo has authored the Healthy Homework Act, which would not ban homework, but which would mandate local school boards and educational agencies to establish homework policies that consider impacts on students' physical and mental health, with input from parents, teachers and students. The proposal comes as a survey of more than 300,000 American students, conducted by Stanford University, shows that 45% of students say workload and homework are their number one causes of stress, And 13,000 California high school students who took the survey report an average of 2.5 hours of homework every night. This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with Jo Fox.
Thank you and welcome back, everyone. Tonight my special guest is Claire Harley, and Claire has been telling us a bit about her research. She's an EdD student, history teacher, assistant principal for curriculum, and she's passionate about research-informed practice. And she's been telling us about the investigations that she's starting to do, in which she's looking at how teachers experience and have a relationship with research-informed practice, which, as we are going to hopefully find out a bit more about in a minute, is not as straightforward as we might suppose. And, full disclosure, you're listening to a pair of geeks geek out about educational research tonight. Would you say that's a fair comment, Claire?
I mean, it's more than accurate, isn't it? Let's be honest. We are where we are.
We are. But, I think it's for me, getting into doing my research, and in some ways I'd actually say even after my master's, I kind of just went through the motions with my master's. It was a long time ago that I did that. But actually getting into it, I found it one of the most rejuvenating professional experiences of my life, because I have felt that I have more control, if not control, understanding of the system that I'm a part of. What do you think? Do you feel have you found it an empowering experience?
So the best analogy I heard from this was one of my lecturers at the University of Nottingham, Tony Bush, and he said that when you're an undergraduate, it's kind of like you're looking at all the different arguments that everybody's saying, and you so and so says this, Smith says that. You describe and you explain what everybody else is saying. But when you get to that master's level, your writing has to reflect that you are now taking a seat at the table. And so it's not just so and so says this, so and so says that. You're not describing. You're really starting to bring a level of criticality to the way that you write, and you don't really get that until master's level. And I did, well, at least I didn't anyway. And so I think that in itself was a really eye-opening experience. And to do an EdD, you'll remember this from like your own research. The idea that you are going to contribute to knowledge on a subject that you're really passionate about is equal parts wonderful and terrifying, right?
It is. And then, when you come to sort of think about who's going to be your examiners and things like that, and you're saying, gosh, I don't know, you feel like a very, very tiny fish in a very big pond.
Yeah, there is that. And it's also, I don't know about you, but I really feel the weight of responsibility here as well, because obviously you go through all the ethical approval stuff and you have to be really careful. But when you're taking the words of teachers as participants and you're analysing data through the stories that they've been brave enough and kind enough to tell you, you have such a moral responsibility to get that right, and that's a gravity to something that I haven't really experienced before. So yeah, it's really eye-opening, and it's definitely something that's like an emancipatory kind of experience. But yeah, there's two sides to it.
And I'm thinking back a little. When I did my first part of my data collection, it was actually during lockdown, so I've been doing this for such a long time. And I can remember interviewing people at a time when everyone was just getting into doing video calls, and actually it was the first sort of adult social contact that people had for days.
Yeah.
And when we were all teaching online and not actually speaking to any other adults at all. And then going through it and listening and transcribing it and sort of going back into it. And I'd come into work, after lockdown, having spent the weekend listening to an interview that somebody gave me during lockdown and having a really weird sense that I spent the weekend with them. It's really strange. So, there's all kinds of things that researchers do which are not things that ordinary people do, which, is a blessing and a curse, I guess. But let's bring it round back to your research, if that's okay with you,
Oh, yeah, sure.
to really think about this idea of there being both positive and negative effects of engagement or contact, because it could be that you've been had, some of us are born researchers and others of us have research thrust upon us.
Yeah, that's a very good way of putting it.
So what, there can be negatives, and I guess those would take a variety of forms. What kind of threads would you say are coming out of, firstly, the positives, but then we'll come on to the perhaps the dark side in a moment?
Sounds good. So the positive sides, which is always the nicer side of things, before we get into the stickier bits, is I think that we've been talking about this idea of a self-improving school system for a number of years now, and for me, I know that sometimes we can see research engagement as very cause and effect. So I read this paper and now at school we do this. So we understand metacognition and now we do this as part of our preparation for GCSE exams. And I think that's lovely. I think that's all well and good. But for me, the really exciting thing about engaging with educational research is the possibilities of that reflective, self-improving school system. So Ralph Waldo Emerson, I can't remember the exact quote, but it's one I use to exemplify this. And it's, I no more remember the books I've read any more than the meals I've eaten, even so they have made me. And even as a school leader or as a teacher, like anybody working with children in a school context, if we read what's going on and what people are saying or thinking about education, if we look at the evidence that's available to us, even if we don't directly refer to an article that we read 4 years ago when we're making a decision, it builds us and it makes us. And that, I think, just in itself is such a powerful opportunity for us as a profession.
Is there anything, and I'm putting you on the spot here, so if there isn't, don't worry, but I can remember in the early days of mine reading things that were passed to me by various people at university, or things that I kind of snowballed off the back of other articles or what have you, and just going, that's me. This was written 15, 20 years ago, but that is my experience. Not only has this been, it's not only been known about, but it's been known about for years, and it's still going on. Have you had any experiences like that where you just thought, they're speaking my language?
Yeah, definitely. And then you go into it thinking, I've got this brilliant, completely unique take on this, guys. And then actually you realise that people have been talking about this for at least 20 years. I do find myself nodding furiously whenever I read anything by Chris Brown or Tim Kaine. I just find the way that they approach this idea of teachers' research-informed practice just on the money and spot on. So I very much I see myself in the way that they talk about the processes. And there's a really interesting article called Is Educational Research Engagement Rational? Is this a good idea? And actually I read it at a point where I really was starting to go, there's loads of really negative things about this, actually. Is this a good idea for everybody? Is this something that we'd want to be a scalable model, for example? I think, very eye-opening. But I've started talking about negatives, and I said I'd talk about positives.
What you've just said, I find that so interesting. And I do think that there is a bit of a scalability problem. And I'll sort of sidestep over into the student experience for a moment. What you've just said has really made me think about the way that we talk to children about aspiration, and how anyone who works hard enough, this kind of meritocratic attitude, anyone who works hard enough can be successful, when actually we know the law of averages and the sort of whole muddy system that we're in means that some people will work hard and they'll have all kinds of setbacks and it'll be quite tragic and unfortunate. And some people will cruise on by because they've got, rich parents or, and there'll be everything in between that as well. So I kind of get what you're saying, that, it could be that there are people who, for them, it's going to add workload, it's going to add confusion, it's going to muddy the waters, where actually they just want to go into work, have good relationships with the children, go home at the end of the day. And so would you say that there are people for whom actually quite happy with that sort of, you go back to your 3-part model, that technicalized version. Don't give me a list, give me a script, if you know what I mean. Whereas other people would hate that.
Yeah, I mean, it's really difficult to say because, again, I think we can fall into the trap sometimes of saying what teachers think. Well, there's tens of thousands of us, so the chances of us all thinking the same thing at the same time is pretty limited. But I do get your point. I wrote a chapter for a book called The 21st Century Teacher Revolution, or Research Informed Revolution. I think it was back in 2019, and my chapter was about teachers who are really skeptical of educational research. And the point I was making was that when people don't see this as something that's useful for them, you really need to be open to why that might be, because there are very rational, very reasonable reasons why this isn't for everybody. And that we can't force people to love something because we love it. That's not helpful. And for lots of different reasons, we do have to contextualize this, because engagement with educational research, like everything else in the world, ends up to a certain extent being political.
Yes.
And we talked earlier, you said that the idea that education, like research, can be thrust upon us, and it is. So it's kind of like, to paraphrase Oscar Wilde, like everything about educational research is about educational research. Apart from educational research, that's about power.
Yes. Yeah. No, I see what you're getting at there, and I think you do need to, and I found it very empowering to understand where we've come from, how we live and teach and work in a kind of a neoliberal system, how things have been sort of managerialized in a way so that we are in a system that is quite greedy for our time, that encourages sort of workaholism, that encourages efficiency seeking, when actually the things we're trying to do are things that need nurturing and take time. So we've got some really unfortunate sort of structural pressures that are binding us in, and many people, if they stop to think of it at all, it's not relevant to the day-to-day getting the job done, which is ultimately, it would be lovely to sit around and philosophize about these things, but for most people, you've got a highly pressurized job, especially, things I would never do, pastoral lead or things like that, because it's so reactive. You're dealing with things that arise during your day. So yeah, it can be a real challenge.
And I think where we see this done well, we would see things like senior leadership teams as part of meetings, or all levels of leadership and roles within schools, within meetings, giving time for reading and exploring and discussion.
Do you think people would do it though?
Well, I think I've seen it and we've done it. So that idea of not read it before and then come with ideas, but we've got some time now. We're going to have a discussion about these things. Let's have some time where we sit and we read and we have a look at those things, and also things that don't necessarily take up time but are really valuable. So if we're going to make decisions for our context, generating some data, like for example using TeacherTapp to gain teacher voice, is a really practical, easy and effective way of using like data generation in education. But we've all seen it the other way around. You and I can't say to people with absolute certainty that the educational research that we love and want to see empower people isn't used in schools to support decisions that have kind of already been made, and then a study's been found to say, well, actually this is what we want to do and this is why, look, this research says it. And it's a red flag, isn't it? Unfortunately it does happen.
What do you think of the idea that people want to see things that are proven to work? And I'm using that term proven quite provocatively, because I don't think it's really something that's applicable to social sciences really, but people do seem to want something that's been, you know, through some kind of randomized control trial or something like that, and those are really hard to do with, you know, in a non-medical context. What do you think?
So I think one thing that we've done pretty well so far in educational research is that there's the quantitative macro study. So we have loads of really good examples of this. Everyone's going to say the Education Endowment Foundation, and we have some really solid, interesting ways at looking at these very big studies. And so when we say it works, or I want to see that it works in order for me to use it, I would always say that actually that's kind of where we as professionals come in. So if there's a literacy program that's worked for 4,000 children in Doncaster, that's brilliant. We know it's a good bet. But the next step for us then is to think, so does this work for us contextually? Is it something that we need to be doing right now? And has the way it's been done there replicable here, and is that a desirable thing? Do we want to do it that way, and why? So there's always going to have to be a level of nuance, even when we have like the most no matter how robust the data is, there always has to be that wiggle room to contextualize things for your school.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree with you more on that. And I you know, I do. Sometimes I worry that the cart might be put before the horse a little bit, and you know, people are saying we're all doing this now because it works because of X, Y, Z. And actually, firstly, does your school need that thing, and how can it be contextualized to your setting? I think that's such an important step for, you know, to bring it round back to your research, to make it a positive experience for people. Because if it is just we're all doing mini whiteboards now, or we're all doing whatever it is now, then people might feel like, oh well, you know, it'll be this now, but next year it'll be something else, and it'll be the same thing I saw 5 years ago, but it's called something different now, and I've got to, you know, one of the things that's come out of my study is people, you know, why do we have to keep renaming everything? Why do we have to call it something else? It's just, you know, we all know what it is, and it's the same thing it was in 2018 or whatever, 2015, 2008, and we just have to call it something different. And I think people find that, they don't feel brought along the journey. Is that part of the negativity, do you think, that people think they're being taught to suck eggs?
I think that is a fair thing to say. And also, I think that when we see something that we've done before rebranded and then shared out with a very excited member of SLT, this is usually me, so I'm taking the mick out of myself. But like, you know, this is going to be so good, and you're like, okay, here we go again. And I think there is a level of that, but also good, because that level of like that respectful skepticism, as long as we're doing so respectfully, and we're doing it with the aim of improving the outcomes and life chances for children, bring it on. I love that idea of skepticism. We've done this before. Okay, so we've done it before and it didn't work. Tell me why. Let's do this better this time. And also these things do change over time, and I think we think of progress as linear, but I think in social sciences like education it is cyclical, and so we will revisit the same things over and over again. But having said that, if anyone calls me a facilitator of learning, I am done. My bag is packed and I am out of here.
Oh dear, what particularly about that phrase irks you?
I just can't. I did do my teacher training at the height of children discover the learning. You then facilitate, and honestly, I do kind of miss the days where I could get the information from the textbook and then print it out on A3 and stick it around my classroom, and then they go and fill it in a table because it looked so buzzy, but no one knew anything about history. So let's not go back there, please. I can't do it.
A bit of busy work, fantastic.
Right?
Yeah, no, it's really interesting, especially when you've been doing this for I mean, I've been doing this slightly longer than you, not a great deal longer, but you do. I mean, I remember doing lesson observations where you kind of got your lesson, this dates it in time, your lesson got graded as unsatisfactory if the kids weren't up and about sticking post-it notes on stuff and each other. And you just leave going, what am I doing here? You know, so hopefully that one won't come back.
I do think though that the quality of the resources that are available in the time that I've been a teacher have just improved so drastically. So it's almost as though we have safeguards against the kind of mistakes that we see, like so VAC and things like that.
Yeah.
I think that we do have safeguards against those now. I'm not saying, I did hear someone reference VAC the other day and there was like a record scratch and everyone kind of turned around, but I think that we have, like, so for example, like the work that Research Ed has done is revolutionary.
Yes,
There's no way of denying it, and I don't think we can take these kind of things for granted for two reasons. Because so Research Ed, the brilliant work being done by the Chartered College, I'm a really big fan of the SSAT journal in terms of like practitioner reflective practice, and also BERA's got like a magazine as well as a journal, so there's a bit more of an accessible, I can read it kind of in the morning kind of a thing, rather than having to get all into the nitty gritty of an article. And we can't take that kind of stuff for granted, because firstly it safeguards us against those kind of mistakes that maybe we've made in the past, but also it could go away. We have to keep really engaging with it and buying tickets for Research Ed events and going along and listening and finding out from other people and joining the Chartered College, because these things aren't a permanent thing if we don't support it. So
it's a bit of a use it or lose it, isn't in there? You know,
and to lose it would be a real shame.
Yeah, and I think you're right, because actually some of these, you know, when you're reading a journal article, then you've got to wade through a methodology section. It's not everyone's cup of tea, and you know, you do need to be able to have someone just give you the breakdown of what it is that they, you know, what happened and what were the findings. You just sort of skip to that. But you know, and an awful lot of these things are behind paywalls as well. So you know, academic journals, if you're not a student at a university, then it's really difficult to get hold of them. So you know, part of the reason for there being a gap between university educational research and teacher practice is that it's expensive and it's dense. So it's good to have these outlets where it's sort of synthesized for sort of time poor but interested people.
I do think there's a bigger issue at play there as well. So this idea of so I spoke at there's an organisation called Belmas, and I spoke at their conference earlier this year. It's an educational academic conference, so it's not so many teachers, it's more people who work in universities, that kind of thing. And the message that I had there was that it feels as though there are kind of two camps, and you're either a practitioner or you're a researcher, and it's such a false dichotomy, because there are people like you and I who are both. And I've met quite a few EdD, MA students who are working full time in schools, and so it's not this one camp or the other. However, I do think that we both have to do a little bit better, because educational research is not always focused at teachers. It's not always focused on the things that we require and that we need. And I said this at the conference earlier this year, and it was, you know, it was well received, and you know, the point was kind of taken, I think. And it's the same. It's true for us as well as teachers. So academia and academics aren't necessarily just the people that we might come across on Twitter or X or whatever it is now. It's much bigger than that and much wider than that. And so I do hear a narrative, and it's valid, and I accept it, of teachers saying, oh yeah, but they don't listen to us, and it's not for us. But I don't know about you, but that's never been my experience with working with academics as part of my EdD. And so I think we both need to do a little bit more listening, and also just this whole, you know, one or the other kind of idea needs to go away, because it's just not real. And there's so many of us living in the middle of it that want the best of both worlds, and I do think it's possible.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I think that actually there could be, and this of course comes down to funding and time and all of those things that we are very impoverished about, but you know, to have that sort of university research link or somebody within schools who's responsible for synthesizing research and making it palatable for busy people, and contextualizing it. Yeah, I think, well, hopefully that's the direction that things are going in. I'd like to think so.
Yeah, I think so. We had, I don't know if you remember, but a few years ago, and it's still going, this idea of the research lead in schools. Obviously, I was that guy at my school, and the Chartered College have launched this idea of research champions within schools and MATs, and I think it's such a great idea to have somebody who has time specifically to go away and do this stuff and think about it. The one caveat to that, though, is that it can become just one person's job, and what we couldn't have as an effective, as to, you know, to be a research informed organization, we couldn't be like, oh yeah, Kathryn does that. So there's a balance to be had, I think.
Yeah. I mean, it's a cultural shift, isn't it? It's a expectation about, you know, what our professional activities should entail, and that sort of thing, which is, I think, a bigger conversation.
Sure.
In terms of, you know, research literacy, then, you know, we don't all have to read all the research all the time, but what would you have any comments on this idea of research literacy, how we can know how to sort through things and how to decide what is for us in our contexts and so on?
Yeah, and I think to go all philosophical and all that kind of thing, I do think that the answer to that question really depends on us really thinking about what do we want for the future of teaching as a profession. And so I think that we have to be really careful with the idea of research literacy, because there are two ways that this whole thing could go. We could, I think, and I'm going to have a preference, and so you're probably going to be able to pick out my biases. But there's one route where we have a system where there are blanket decisions that are being made. There are policies that are being implemented that are then top down and are very, this is how we do stuff, and there's no wiggle room, and we very heavily like prescribe what that looks like for teachers. And in that kind of model, research literacy doesn't really play a part, because my role within that model isn't to think, it's to do. And so that's one way that it can be approached, and research is still part of that. It's, we read the stuff and now we want you to do this. The other model is where we look at a system where we have more of an emphasis and value for teacher expertise. And I'm not saying that we can't have structures. Of course we do. I'm not a hypocrite. I'm a senior leader in a school, right? So we all have systems and teaching and learning processes that we have as a policy, or the way that we do things here. But if we want to create that self-improving system where we lean into and luxuriate over nuance, and we think about teaching and learning structures that are research engaged, but help us find that happy medium between, this is how we do stuff here as a school, and that uniformity, which I think is really important for pupils to, you know, they know which way's up if they hear the same kind of language. Sure. But then at the same time, making sure that teachers' understanding of the classroom, because who knows them better than their teacher, is really valued, and that flexibility is there within the system. And I think that it was where research literacy becomes a really important element.
No, that's really brilliant, and I totally agree. Structure. I mean, I think that structure is needed to facilitate that feed forward as well. So it's really, really key. And, you know, certainly I wouldn't want to be technicalized to within an inch of my professional life. I think that would be pretty tedious, actually. I'm going to just play our sponsorship messages once again, and then when I come back, we'll just have about 4 or 5 minutes, and I'm going to put this question to you, Claire. I wonder if you could just consider this while the adverts are playing. If you were the Education Secretary and you had a magic wand, what would you do and why? Okay, we'll hear from you on that in a minute.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Introducing Reading Solutions UK. Home to Dreambox Reading Plus, the online reading development programme, improving outcomes for students and schools nationwide. Create stronger readers in your school from Key Stage 2 to beyond GCSE, using Reading Plus's evidence-based adaptive technology. Reading Plus accurately assesses your students' skills gaps and places them on a personalised learning pathway, built to accelerate their strengths and improve on their areas for development. You can try the programme with a free 4-week pilot today. Search Reading Solutions UK to find their website and request your free pilot today.
How can you show your students the opportunities that await them? How can you fuel their aspirations and motivate them to achieve? Future Careers provides a wealth of stimulating resources aimed at encouraging 14 to 19-year-olds to pursue careers in STEM and SHAPE. We help you to show your students what they can aim for and how. From articles to activity sheets, animations to podcasts, all our resources align with Gatsby benchmarks and are free for you and your students to download. Visit futurumcareers.com and subscribe today. Futurum Careers, helping teachers to inspire the next generation.
Get set for the year ahead with the Bloomsbury Education Back to School sale. Save 30% on all Bloomsbury education books until 30th September. From the very best in research-led practice to trusted advice on inclusivity, behaviour and curriculum design, we've got something for everyone. Visit bloomsbury.com/B2S sale to shop now and save 30%. Bloomsbury Education, books for every step of your teaching journey.
Teachers, mark your calendars for Bet UK 2025, the world's biggest EdTech event. Join over 30,000 educators at the Excel London from the 22nd to the 24th of January. Discover the latest EdTech innovations, network with peers and access hundreds of hours of CPD. Did we mention it's 100% free for educators? Whether you're looking for inspiration or practical tools to enhance your teaching, Bet has it all. Don't miss this opportunity to shape the future of education. Register today at uk.betshow.com. That's uk.betshow.com.
So we're back here, just a few more minutes left, and I'm going to ask Claire, before I went to the adverts, I asked Claire to give us her sort of fantasy educational secretary magic wand. What would she do? And Claire, I wonder, what have you been thinking of?
Okay, I have two parts to my answer.
Okay, fantastic.
The first one you're going to guess straight away, which is, and it's going to need a magic wand because it would require a lot of money and a lot more teachers. But the first thing that I would like is time allocated on teachers' timetables to read, reflect, or do something that they feel would benefit their practice as professionals.
Mm-hmm.
So time cut off for there. And then the second thing that I would like is, I think that we have a lot of really brilliant large scale macro research that we're using as a profession. Mm-hmm. And I would wave my magic wand and I would find space for those magic small thought processes that are going on in schools, those actual research, those I just tweaked this and it worked so well moments, and sharing those and having that same kind of value and appreciation for those bits too, because I think that all research is useful and interesting, but I just think that's where the magic is for me anyway.
Brilliant. No, I really appreciate your answers on that. And we have run out of time. We're coming to the end of our show, and I really want to say a big thank you to Claire. This is Claire Harley, who's joined us this evening on the Late Late Show. And if you've just catching up with us, she is an EdD student history teacher and assistant principal for curriculum, and is absolutely passionate. We've been utterly convinced of your passion for research informed practice this evening, Claire. So thank you so much for coming coming on, and all the very best with your new baby on the way, and also with your research. And we will keep in touch to find out how you get on.
Thank you, and thank you so much for having me.
You're very welcome. Thank you very much. Well, thank you to everyone who's tuned in, either tonight live or on the podcast. I hope that you've enjoyed these conversations this evening. And please do visit us at ttradio.org to find out about all the other great podcasts that we have on our archive, and all the shows that are coming up this week. Remember, there's always shows every day and all kinds of topics, so do have a look and see if there's anything that interests you. In the meantime, thank you for listening, and bye for now.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.